Good evening and welcome to the Modise Network. That the South African economy is in a recession is now widely accepted. President Cyril Ramaphosa had to come up with an emergency response of a stimulus package that includes relaxation of visa requirements. The Minister of Home Affairs, Malusi Gigaba, has announced a special dispensation for visitors from especially Brazil and China, India to support tourism. President Ramaphosa has been on a drive to attract $100 billion of foreign direct investment over the next 5 years. He's faced with state-owned entities that have run huge debts and the public sector that is bloated and in some instances underperforming. The president admitted in the United States earlier this week that the economy is concentrated in a few hands and that few sectors dominate the economy. South Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, with those between 15 and 35 making more than half of the 30% or so unemployed. There is corruption in the system that has bled the public finances of more than 100 billion rands. The private sector has been uncompetitive. The culture of entrepreneurship in South Africa is low. The majority black population is still on the margins, and the general population is restless. As part of our Emerging Countries series, we ask this question: South Africa, what is to be done? My panelists are Anne Bernstein, Director at the Center of Development and Enterprise to my left. And next to Anne is Zwelinzima Vavi, the General Secretary of SAFTU, the Labour Federation. And welcome. Leon Lowe to my right, he's Director of Free Market Foundation, and political economist Professor Patrick Bond next to Leon Lowe. And a pleasure to have you here with us. And of course, our guests who do have their contributions to make and questions to ask. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this recording session of a very, very important discussion. Now, the president came up with a stimulus package, obviously responding to the negative news about the economy being in recession. And he came up with several measures there. Everyone has got their key point, their key issue out of that they feel strongly about, in support of or against or opposed to. Zwelinzima Vavi, let me start with you.
Well, as soon as the president said everything that he's going to be doing will be done within the existing fiscal and, I guess, monetary and economic policies, then I closed my ears.
You did?
I said, nothing is coming, yeah? We're going to be doing exactly the same thing that have happened since 1994, that have dismally failed the unemployed, the youth, the economy as a whole, that have led us to be the most unequal society in the world, that has an economy that is now ranked number 6 in the whole world in terms of unemployment rate, and an economy in deep, deep crisis. And then he mentioned 50 billion that will be reprioritized. And I said, but the existing economic framework is the austerity program that has been underway in response to the world economic crisis of 2008 and 2009. The austerity program have led to deep cuts in all social expenditure items. So I said, what is he going to reprioritize in that context? And therefore, my conclusion was that this whole press conference and hullabaloo around it is about somebody who's facing a house burning, with people literally in the streets in Kimberley, in Cape Town, daily, with 13,000, 14,000 service delivery protests happening in this country every day. Then we have the captain playing in the periphery, guaranteeing everybody that everything will be done with.
I want to pick up some of the points you've raised, because, you know, it's got to do with the room within which he could maneuver, and he might argue and say, that is the best I could come up with given the current conditions. We'll pick up the conversation in a moment. But Anne, what was your take when you had the president present the stimulus package?
Well, I think it's not bold enough. South Africa is in desperate trouble, and we need a bold reform agenda. I think there were signals of moving in what I would argue is a better direction, some own goals that needed correction, but we know far too little. In the course of a few months, this will happen. In the course of another few months, something else will happen. So I think there's a lot that's unknown at the moment. I'm worried that it's not nearly bold enough, and policy change is cheap, doesn't cost us money, but it could have enormous implications. When you sit with the crises of unemployment, of South Africa is spending far more than we earn. We're in desperate trouble. Our SOEs add to that debt all the time. We're paying money in debt, sort of recovery costs, which we could be spending much more productively. And I think that we needed a much bolder package. One thing I do support is the extension of the employment tax incentive for young workers from 5 to 10 years now. That's a good thing. It's the only incentive for employment that we have. But in terms of really turning the corner to lift South Africa to a higher growth rate and a much more labour-intensive economy, I think too little.
Leon Low?
Yes, these things are never binary. It's not simply all good or all bad. Most of it is good, but it's very little, as Anne says. Just to give you some simple numbers, I don't want to make them complicated, but if the reprioritising improves the quality of 50 billion rand so-called stimulus from, let's say, being -5 in efficiency to +5 in efficiency, that's a turnaround of 50 billion by 10%. Just to give you where that fits into the economy, that's 1% of the GDP. Now, if that 10% improves by that 1% improves by 10%, it's 0.01%. So when Anne says it's too little, it's seriously too little. It's not going to make any significant stimulus, but what little there is positive. I think everyone will agree, we won't agree on what ought to be done, but we probably will all agree on this panel that a lot ought to be done. I would say it's very simple, Tim. You simply look around the world and you say, which are the economies that have high growth and strong currencies and are rich, and what do they do? And what they do is really not rocket science, it's not very complicated. They liberalize and privatize. They run market economies. Every market economy is spectacularly prosperous, and every non-market economy is a disaster, as we have refused to become a simple, straightforward market economy.
Well, I suppose, Leon Low, gentleman sitting next to you, Professor Bond, they will disagree completely and say, you know, the fundamental problem of South Africa's economy is exactly that it's lost direction. What we should be, we should be establishing in South Africa is a socialist-leaning type economy, and maybe some of the problems that we talk about would be sorted out. Is that your view, Patrick?
You said it better than I could, but Leon, your theory would work if we had a normal capitalist economy. This is the most corrupt corporate elite in the world, according to the biannual PricewaterhouseCoopers surveys of economic crimes. You can check that on their website if you don't believe me. We should be talking about that a lot more, because your people have been benefiting from the liberalization and the privatization and not plowing back. They've got over $1 trillion and probably 1.4 trillion in loose money they're not reinvesting. So if, especially a public enterprise minister, Pravin Gordhan, wants to draw private funds into infrastructure, that would be, and you'd probably agree, 400 billion for infrastructure, that would be more substantive. Then our job is to ask, so who wins and who loses? Because you know, in February at the budget, they made about 40 billion in cuts to basic needs infrastructure. And what we're looking at for the infrastructure priorities, the ones that Ramaphosa was getting from China, are mega power plants that are quite corrupt, or the big train line, which had those locomotives that the Chinese lent for $5 billion with South China Rail corrupting Transnet with the Guptas. Those mega projects is where I would say big money is coming, but we should be very careful, because it's probably...
So I get a sense that you're not that optimistic after all. I mean, obviously, when something is packaged and given a name and announced in the manner that it was, it, you know, captures our minds, and we end up discussing it, and we believe that it will solve our problems. Now, let's get to the politics as well of it, and I'll come to you, Zwelinzima Vavi, again, because we'll hear people around the president, in the government, and his own party saying, yeah, well, you can have this stimulus package, but it goes against the resolutions of the ANC at Nasrec. Which one becomes which here? The National Development Plan, stimulus package, Nasrec resolutions, which one do you think is likely to see the light of day and make, well, however marginal, difference to the economy?
That's $1 million question. Nobody knows, really. What is in the mind of the president is the directives he received from the Nasrec conference, which in the most talk about expropriation of land without compensation, is that the agenda of the 10-member panelists, which include the chairperson of Agri South Africa, is that where we are going to with that type of collection of individuals? Or is it the rating agencies who keeps on saying, stick in this line, you dare move around, we're going to punish you, we already have you on negative, we're going to take you into a complete junk status in terms of your investment rating? Is it the people who are marching in the streets demanding jobs and service delivery, who are fighting against evictions and all of that? Which one is in the priority of the president's mind?
You know, yeah.
My conclusion,
yeah.
And this is no statement against the president, but it's a statement against the ANC, is that unfortunately the ANC has sought to prioritize the bosses in Washington, in the IMF, and with their police person or their enforcers, the rating agency, being the most visible enforcers of the current neoliberal paradigm and that have plunged South Africa into the crisis we are talking about.
And we're going to pick up on parts of what you're saying, but we talk about what the president said at the top, the 50 billion rands. But South Africa is a three-tier system, right? We talk about the unemployment rate in a generalized fashion, but you'll find that the rate is lower unemployment-wise in, say, Gauteng and Western Cape compared to Limpopo, Eastern Cape, and so on. But what do you think, then, the other levels of government should be doing to support the stimulus package? It may not work, in other words, in other parts of the country, simply because of the conditions that prevail there and the capacity that is there.
Look, Tim, I can't really answer that because we don't know enough about the stimulus package. In many respects, metro governments, city governments, provincial governments, they're policy takers. They are influenced by national policy. So let me give you one example. The president said we're going to deal with visas for highly skilled people. Did he mean just visas for the people that big business wants? Or did he mean we're going to open this economy to skilled immigrants? I'm in favor of opening this economy to skilled immigrants. This would help South Africa grow our economy. The evidence is overwhelming all over the world. Another government has funded the training of somebody and we get that for free. But I don't know what he meant. It's not clear. Is this just a deal to suit the big companies that have been shouting, and they do need this issue dealt with? But I'm interested in the whole economy. I'm interested in how we get much higher growth, many more small firms, and much more employment and training.
Sure.
And we need more skilled people. So you can't actually say, I think we've got to be very careful in terms of how little we know about the stimulus package. He talks of 26 sort of zones in townships and rural areas that are defunct in the article today, that they're going to somehow magic will appear and these places will
Well, we need magic. We do need magic at this time.
But you need to think hard about what does this mean. We don't know where the 26 places are. I don't know exactly what is being promised here.
Okay, we'll continue the conversation in a moment, and thanks very much for that. And Leon Lowe, Patrick Bond, you also want to respond to what we've just heard. I've got a few more questions to go, and I will be taking some of the questions from our guests who are with us here. Stay with us as we continue to take a look at the state of the South African economy, and this will continue after the break.